Well, welcome everybody. My name is Marty Mascari. I'm with the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging and the North Central Texas Aging and Disability Resource Center, or ADRC, both of which are under the North Central Texas Council of Governments. We are incredibly blessed here once again to have our partners at the James L. West Center to talk about Alzheimer's disease and how it affects the brain. Before we get started, we're going to first talk about CEUs. But before we do that, I'm going to say, we're on. You guys don't have access to your voice. We got you. Everybody's on mute. When we do these webinars, there's so many people. It's just impossible for us to start opening up mics. So please put any comments or questions you have either in the Q&A or the chat as we go along. Jamie, I'm going to let you start.
Great. Thank you, Marty. And we're thrilled to be here and to continue to partner with you and the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging. But we are able to offer 1 free hour of CE credits for nurses, social workers, licensed professional counselors, and if you want a certificate of attendance as well, we can do that. In the follow-up email you'll receive either this afternoon or tomorrow from Marty, there will be a link to a SurveyMonkey evaluation. And this is, we ask everybody to complete this evaluation just on the program, but if you're wanting CE credits, it's required for you to complete the SurveyMonkey evaluation. And it's only a few minutes, it only takes a few minutes, but the link and the survey do close at the end of the day on October the 19th. And then if you will please allow us at least 3 weeks from that day, 4 weeks from today to process all those credits and send them out to you to your email.
In addition to the SurveyMonkey, and please note that the SurveyMonkey, we want everybody to complete it, but it is required if you want CEUs. You've got to do the SurveyMonkey evaluation. There's been a little bit of confusion that people, and it just depends on who the CEU provider is. In this case, it's the James L. West Center, and they're able to provide nursing, which is not something that we're set up to do. But you must complete their SurveyMonkey, but we're also asking you to complete the Google survey that should pop up as you log out of the webinar today. If it doesn't pop up, you'll get a link for that as well with a follow-up email. That information is to help us report back on the goals and objectives we set forth when we applied for our funding to do these webinars. Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, and that's great.
Oh yeah. And I will add to this, just for anybody, that you have to attend the live webinar to get the CE credits, not necessarily the recording that Marty will send out. And we do ask, it's important, as Marty pointed out, that we, to be able to offer these programs to you all for free, we do have, we apply for grants and we have to report back to them. So as you, we ask you to complete the surveys for a reason, so we can continue to provide these for free to you all. But we are going to talk about Alzheimer's disease today. Over the rest of the hour, we're going to dive into what Alzheimer's disease is and how it affects the brain. I will say we're not going to be able to cover every single slide in depth that I have, but you have this information to read. We ask that you share this information with all those that you think would benefit from it. But I do want to make sure, so some things I might go through fairly quickly, but I want to make sure we get to everything and that there's plenty of time for questions at the end. But real quick, so the James L. West Center is partnered with Marty and the North Texas Central Area Agency on Aging. But here at the West Center, we take care of persons impacted by dementia. And that is, maybe it's the person that has the diagnosis, and we can do that through our long-term care, respite care, or our day program, but also take care of their family members, their friends, healthcare professionals, and the larger community through our free education that we offer to the community. This is just some information we need for the CE credits and my bio. And then what we will cover today, just the learning objectives we hope you walk away with, is to define what Alzheimer's disease is. We're going to talk about what's included in that proper diagnosis and a little bit about the medications and what they can and can't do. And then we will go through common changes that happen in the early stages, middle stages, and late stages. So we can kind of see, excuse me, some clinical characteristics that are common for Alzheimer's disease. And then we will talk about a theory of retrogenesis. It's not on here, but it's a better picture on how to understand and look at persons with Alzheimer's disease, look at them with what still remains and what abilities do they have, no matter what stage of the disease they're in, as opposed to looking at what's lost. Excuse me. But you can see up here are some statistics, and these are taken from the Alzheimer's Association facts and figures from this year, 2022. And I'll point out a few of them, but right now there are more than 6 million Americans that are living with Alzheimer's disease. And by 2050, this number is projected to rise to 13 million, barring there's a cure or a prevention for the disease. 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia, and this kills more than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. In 2020, COVID did increase the deaths of persons with Alzheimer's and dementia, and partly this was due to persons that got COVID and passed away from that, but also some of the, I would say, repercussions or collateral damage that maybe COVID did cause as far as isolation goes, and then just a decline in the disease. Maybe they did get COVID and they recovered from it, but the disease state declined, and so it increased their death expectancy or life expectancy. Right now, there $321 billion are spent on the cost of care for this disease. And by 2050, that number could reach nearly 1 trillion in the cost of care. And this is hospital stays, Medicare stays, care, just the care across the board. And there are 11 million Americans providing care, unpaid care. So these are our families, our friends, our neighbors that are providing this care for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And I would say maybe that number is a little bit higher depending on how we report. Some people might not identify as a potential caregiver, but if you provide care or assistance in any form and unpaid, that number would include you. And of course, those hours reach more than 16 billion hours of care, which cost, I mean, if you put a cost value to that, it would be over $270 billion. A few more stats I wanted to point out. Right now, by 2050, almost 13 million people, like we said, are projected to get Alzheimer's disease by 2050. But some of the kind of cultural disparities with that is almost 2/3 of those persons are women. And older Black Americans are about twice as likely to have Alzheimer's disease than older whites. And then older Hispanics are about 1.5 times likely to have Alzheimer's disease other than older, compared to older whites. And they are doing some research into this and those cultural disparities, a lot of complexity that goes into that, but it's important to note. That people living with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, of course, have twice as many hospital stays per year compared to just an older adult without dementia. So that increased the cost. It can also increase the stress levels, not only for that care person or the care provider, care partner, whether it's a professional or a family member, but also just the burden and stress on the person having to go to the hospital and not understanding what's going on. And I just put in there in Texas because that's where we are from. In 2020, a couple of years ago, there was approximately 400,000 persons living with dementia. But in 2025, which is just a couple of years away, that number is projected to increase by 23%. And the reason I have these out here in these statistics is not necessarily, it's all doom and gloom and look at how bad the numbers are. While there are numbers, I mean, there are big numbers and they're projected to increase if we don't find a cure or some medication to help modify the disease or a prevention. I put these numbers out here and I ask that you look at them in a different way, is that there is a mission and there's an opportunity for us to learn more about this disease so we can provide better care for those that are currently living with it and will be living with it in the future, whether it's an actual individual, if you're a professional, but also as a family member and a friend, to be able to provide that care, understand what's going on, provide the best care, but also be able to help those others care partners. Maybe it's you are caregiving for a caregiver that's caring for somebody with dementia. How do I best support them, right? And just looking at this, there's a mission and opportunity for us to do better, to learn more and to do better. When we know more, we can do more, right? So that's why I hope you look at those numbers, you know, as this is a reality, but right now, how can I use these numbers as an opportunity? I'm going to show this quick video. It's 3 minutes. You may have seen it before. We have definitely used it because it's such a great summary of Alzheimer's disease, the pathology, how it progresses through the brain, and different areas of the brain that it affects, and what that looks like for a person. So let's watch this.
What is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's is a slow, fatal disease of the brain affecting 1 in 10 people over the age of 65. No one is immune. The disease comes on gradually as 2 abnormal protein fragments called plaques and tangles accumulate in the brain and kill brain cells. They start here in the hippocampus, the part of the brain where memories are first formed. Over many years' time, the plaques and tangles slowly destroy the hippocampus, and it becomes harder and harder to form new memories. Simple recollections from a few hours or days ago that the rest of us might take for granted are just not there. After that, more plaques and tangles spread into different regions of the brain, killing cells and compromising function wherever they go. This spreading around is what causes the different stages of Alzheimer's. From the hippocampus, the disease spreads here to the region of the brain where language is processed. When that happens, it gets tougher and tougher to find the right word. Next, the disease creeps toward the front of the brain, where logical thought takes place. Very gradually, a person begins to lose the ability to solve problems, grasp concepts, and make plans. Next, the plaques and tangles invade the part of the brain where emotions are regulated. When this happens, the patient gradually loses control over moods and feelings. After that, the disease moves to where the brain makes sense of things it sees, hears, and smells. In this stage, Alzheimer's wreaks havoc on a person's senses and can spark hallucinations. Eventually, the plaques and tangles erase a person's oldest and most precious memories, which are stored here in the back of the brain. Near the end, the disease compromises a person's balance and coordination. And in the very last stage, it destroys the part of the brain that regulates breathing and the heart. The progression from mild forgetting to death is slow and steady, and takes place over an average of 8 to 10 years. It is relentless and, for now, incurable. Helping your family, friends, and neighbors to better understand Alzheimer's will reduce stigma, improve care, and even help the fight for a cure. Thanks for helping to do your part. Learn more at www.aboutalz.org. What is Alzheimer's disease?
I need to watch it once. Okay. Well, I hope that it's a really great summary on what is happening, how it progresses through the brain. Now, I will say with Alzheimer's disease, while we have a framework of how it progresses through the brain, you know, we know it starts in the hippocampus, and then it kind of moves to our vocabulary area of the brain, to problem solving, executive functioning, up to the senses, and then into the motor movements. What it looks like for an individual is going to be different. This disease is very individualistic, and you might know, I've got, you know, my grandfather had Alzheimer's disease and my mom has Alzheimer's disease. Same diagnosis, but it's going to look different because they're 2 different people. And if we think about it, our brain controls everything that we do. It controls our keeping our heart beating. It might be digesting your lunch right now. It's regulating your body temperature, but it's also your social graces and that filter, your inhibitions, your personality. And so when this disease, Alzheimer's disease, starts to attack different areas of the brain, what that looks like for each person or how that manifests in each person is going to look a little bit different. And I'll talk more about that. But it is a progressive neurologic disorder. It is the most common type of all the irreversible dementias that are out there. And there's about 130 different types of irreversible dementias. You can see here, dementia is that umbrella term. And dementia is a group of symptoms that somebody has that interferes with their ability to function on a day-to-day basis. So cognitive abilities, just functioning abilities, behavioral abilities for them to get through day-to-day. Alzheimer's disease, the most common type of an irreversible or progressive chronic dementia. You can see here, and we've had programs about Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal, and the other types of dementia that we've dived deep into. But Alzheimer's does cause a continuous decline in thinking, our behavioral skills, our social skills, and again, it eventually impairs a person's ability to function independently in a safe way. Alzheimer's disease is a type of brain disease. Just like you would say COPD is a type of heart disease. It is degenerative, meaning that it's going to gradually get worse over time. And it is a terminal diagnosis. So if somebody does not pass away from something else, they will pass away from the complications of Alzheimer's disease. And dementia, because dementia and Alzheimer's disease, those words are used interchangeably quite a bit, and Alzheimer's disease being the most common type of dementia, and a lot of research goes into Alzheimer's disease, that's why those words are used interchangeably. But like I mentioned, dementia is a group of symptoms that somebody has that impairs their daily functioning and different functions of their brain. And some of those functions you can see here, it's that memory, that short-term memory loss, ability to pay attention, language skills, whether it's their ability to speak and use language, but also comprehension of language as well, personality and behavioral changes, motor and movement coordination as well. There are the irreversible dementias, and then there are dementias or things that cause the same symptoms of dementia that can be fixed or treated. What we focus on, of course, is those irreversibles. We know the cause of these symptoms, the short-term memory loss. I know the cause of why they're not thinking or reasoning like they used to, or their behavioral changes. Alzheimer's disease is the cause of those symptoms. And we need to do our treatment and plan our quality of life around that diagnosis. The other things can cause these same symptoms, like a medication interaction or an infection of some sort. But that is what's causing those symptoms. It's a medication interaction. I can flesh out those medications, get off some, maybe get on some other ones that are more effective. And those symptoms, memory issues, confusion, poor judgment, may go away because what was causing the symptoms was treated. With Alzheimer's disease, we'll have treatment options because we know what's causing those symptoms. For Alzheimer's disease, the risk factors, a lot of the risk factors that we have are fairly modifiable. There's a lot of lifestyle choices that we can do, but there are things that we don't really have a lot of control over. Your number one risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and most other related dementias is age. So the older we get, the higher our risk is to develop Alzheimer's disease. Now, I will say, and I hope everybody hears me, Alzheimer's disease and related dementias are not a normal part of aging. They are becoming a more common part of aging, but they're not a normal part of aging. It doesn't mean once you hit 77, that means you're going to get Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia. It's not normal. But it is our greatest risk factor. There is a familial history that can increase your risk as well. So if you have a parent or a sibling that has Alzheimer's disease, it can increase your risk a little bit, but it's not deterministic. And it has to do with some genetics. There are a little bit less than 1% of all diagnoses of Alzheimer's disease are genetic. So if somebody has a particular gene that is, you get this gene and you will get Alzheimer's disease, it's less than 1% of those types of genes that are out there. The rest of it does increase your risk factor if it's in the family, but it's not deterministic. It's just a risk factor, just like getting older is a risk factor, head trauma might be a risk factor, you can see here as well. Gender, I did mention earlier about 2/3 of people diagnosed are women. So they are looking into why that is, particularly hormones, doing some research into hormones and why that might be. There's also the fact that women tend to live longer than men. Our life expectancy is just longer than men is. So that plays a factor into it as well. If women are living longer and my greatest risk factor is age, then you might have more women diagnosed. But they're also looking at hormones and what makes those genders different. Smoking and drinking dramatically increase your risk for Alzheimer's disease, and so do cardiovascular diseases, particularly unmanaged cardiovascular diseases. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, high homocysteines, obesity that, of course, is hard on the heart, that goes unmanaged, or you've had obesity the majority of your life, can increase your risk. In fact, there are some studies that suggest that show as many as 80% of persons with Alzheimer's disease also had cardiovascular disease. So there might be a tie there for that. A history of unmanaged depression can increase your risk, and then environmental toxins and lifestyle choices. If we're living, they're looking at pollution levels, they're looking at things that our food are made with. They're looking at a lot of stuff, chemicals that are just in our environment that we're exposed to, but also unmanaged stress, diet, exercise, what we feed ourselves, limited activity physically, but also mentally and socially and spiritually. All of these can either increase your risk or help decrease your risk for dementia, for Alzheimer's disease. And on here, as we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, these are two graphics of what warning signs look like. With Alzheimer's disease, and like the video suggested, we know it starts in that hippocampus. Our hippocampus area of the brain is responsible for our short-term memory and our ability to learn new things. So when there is a loss of, I cannot hold on to something new, essentially, and I can't remember that I just asked you that question or what we did yesterday or what I had for breakfast, it's because that part of the brain, that hippocampus, has been damaged by Alzheimer's disease, those plaques and tangles that build up. So these regularly repeated questions, you might notice there are little notes around the house as little reminders. I don't want to forget this. I'm going to put this note here, and that may help for a little while. But as the disease progresses, that will no longer really be effective. Difficulty with everyday tasks, and these are the things that I'm used to doing. This can be anything from managing my medications all the way up to managing my food, my nutrition, my hygiene, things like that. Having a hard time following storylines. This is particularly if there's a lot of people in the conversation, it's really hard and it takes a lot of brain power to really keep up with all the different people in the conversation. And maybe there's several different conversations going on, and this person said something that I need to be able to relate back and think, because I want to respond to that later, but I got to hold on to it and logically think of a good answer, and then I'm going to speak it. There's a lot to it when there's multiple people in one conversation, or just following a storyline, whether it's a TV storyline or it's a storyline somebody's telling you. It's harder for persons, even in early stage Alzheimer's disease, to follow those things. Trouble finding items, maybe putting something down and then not being able to retrace their steps on where they put it. Getting lost often, and this is getting lost in unfamiliar places, but also noticing even in familiar places, they can become befuddled about where are they at, or I need to get to the restroom, for instance, and I'm just lost in my environment. One of my grandfathers had dementia before he passed away, Alzheimer's disease, and I remember distinctly seeing him in his house that he had lived in for as long as I've been born, confused. And just kind of, had a lot of anxiety on his face because he was looking for the restroom and he could not find that restroom. And it didn't happen all the time, but in that moment for him, he had a need and he couldn't meet that need on his own in a place that he'd been in for years, 20 years or more. So we can see that hard time communicating, whether it's them having a hard time using their words or what we've always used to communicate, but also that comprehension, understanding how we're communicating with them as well. focusing on one thing, shortened attention span, concentration is just not there, and then mood changes that can happen. This can be anything from I'm going to socially withdraw because I'm making mistakes or things are just harder for me. So I'm going to just self-isolate. It could also be easily agitated, right? And they're not as in control of that agitation as maybe they once were, anything like that. And then the behavior worsening at night or as the evening goes on. With Alzheimer's disease, typically people do fairly well in the morning. And we all, you and I, we all have our better times of the day where I just have more focus, have more attention, more alertness, right? But then when I'm more tired in my time of the day, and for most people, Alzheimer's disease, it's late afternoon, early evening, I'm just more tired and I'm not able to manage or handle the situation or the environment like I used to. And I'm having a hard time communicating that. And I'm more confused than I was, and maybe I'm a little bit more afraid and have higher anxiety. So my behavior, how I'm communicating is going to change. My behavior might worsen at night. And it's not a behavior, it's an expression. They're trying to tell you there's something I'm not quite understanding, or I'm having a hard time, and this is how I can tell you. So Alzheimer's disease is thought to begin several years before we ever start to see any signs. So this disease, those plaques and tangles that build up in the brain, in the hippocampus, they start to wreak havoc, and it can be anywhere from, a couple of years, even up to 20 years, they start to wreak havoc in that hippocampus brain. And I think of it as this little, like they need to eat. These plaques and tangles become these bodies and they need to eat. So they eat those neurons. And depending on how many neurons, what that reserve you have or a person has, they can eat and eat and eat and eat until that reserve starts to dwindle, right? And then you start to see those signs of short-term memory loss. Mom's repeating herself. Mom cannot remember that we just had that conversation. My spouse is telling me that same story over and over again. I'm starting to see this because those reserves have been eaten up, essentially. And then as those plaques and tangles continue to eat and eat and eat, and then they need more food. Well, there's no more food here left in that hippocampus because it's all gone. So then they move on to more the temporal lobes where that language is, where there's food, and they start to eat and eat. And then they just continue to eat throughout the brain. Eat those neurons until they start to dwindle and there's no more food left. Symptoms can occur because of damage that's happened in the area of the brain, or damage that's happening to those neurons, or the neurons have been destroyed, so they're not there anymore. Again, it's those plaques and tangles are eating them up. So they might just be they're in the process of eating them, so there's some damage until they're all gone, and then they're not there anymore. Eventually, every area of the brain that's responsible for a person's basic functioning is affected. So Alzheimer's disease is a terminal diagnosis. And the rate at which Alzheimer's disease progresses does vary. On average, somebody, once they're diagnosed, lives about 8 to 10 years. Most people, even today, are getting diagnosed fairly late in the disease state. But it could be somebody's living a couple of years all the way up to somebody can live up to 20 years. Your age that you're diagnosed is also plays factor into that. So most stats and most research goes for people that are 65 and older. But we are seeing that subset of earlier onset Alzheimer's disease. So people that are younger than 65, so they might be in their 50s, early 60s. If you're diagnosed a little bit younger, that disease state tends to progress a little bit faster, as opposed to someone that's diagnosed at a normal, they call it normal onset Alzheimer's disease. This disease is not something a person can control, nor is it something that they've caused. I want to put that out there. We didn't do something to cause Alzheimer's disease. And it's also nothing that they can control either, or the progression of it, or things like that. I do want to point out that there are some abilities that remain. We're going to see another video and see a picture of the brain and what's happening while Alzheimer's disease does eat, kind of eat away at the neurons in the brain. It doesn't take away everything. And a philosophy of care that all of our education is rooted in is what remains. What abilities are still left? Early stages, middle stages, late stages, what's still left? And here's just a list of some things that Alzheimer's disease does not take away. It doesn't take away a person's feelings or emotions, how they feel, what makes them feel a certain way. Now, they may not be as in control of their feelings of emotions, but the disease will never take those away. Their physical strength, there's a little asterisk at that. Some people with Alzheimer's disease can be perfectly physically healthy all the way up to the end states. It's their brain that has the disease, and the brain is starting to fail them. Lifetime habits, whether it's playing the piano or the guitar, because you've been doing that since a child. So those are older memories that can stay for a long time. The basic instinct to thrive and survive. This is anywhere for what are my needs? I need my needs to be met. But also our coping skills. My coping skill of when things don't go my way or I'm scared or frightened. Right now, I have several ways to express myself with that and to cope a certain way with that. When I was younger, I had other ways. I had to learn, when things didn't go my way or I was scared when I was a little kid, I had a temper tantrum, right? As I get older, I learned different coping skills, different ways of handling that, that need, that thrive, that survive. With this disease, Alzheimer's disease doesn't take away those needs. It's how we're able to express them is what's changing. The five senses do not go away as well. Now, the five senses may become limited, but with Alzheimer's disease, what's happening is there's an interpretation issue. It may be that they see something right there, but they're not able to tell you what it is or know how to use it anymore. But it's not that they don't see it. They're just unsure what the object is or what to do with it. Personality preferences, being able to make connections. And this is with other human beings, nature, pets, animals. Those connections might look different, but they're able to connect always. Understand body language and tone of voice will always be there, and being able to distinguish between different kinds of touch. And touch is a form of communication. So really, what are we communicating? And there's so much more, but those are a few things I just wanted to point out. So this video is a little bit, goes a little bit more into clinical about what's happening exactly with the plaques and tangles and some other things that are happening in the brain with Alzheimer's disease. And we will watch this.
In healthy people, all sensations, movements, thoughts, memories, and feelings are the result of signals that pass through billions of nerve cells or neurons in the brain. Neurons constantly communicate with each other through electrical charges that travel down axons, causing the release of chemicals across tiny gaps to neighboring neurons. Other cells in the brain, such as astrocytes and microglia, clear away debris and help keep neurons healthy. In a person with Alzheimer's disease, the most basic form of dementia, toxic changes in the brain destroy this healthy balance. These changes may occur years, even decades, before the first signs of dementia. Researchers believe that this process involves two proteins, called beta amyloid and tau, which somehow become toxic to the brain. It appears that abnormal tau accumulates, eventually forming tangles inside neurons. And beta amyloid clumps into plaques, which slowly build up between neurons. As the level of amyloid reaches a tipping point, there is a rapid spread of tau throughout the brain. But tau and beta amyloid may not be the only factors involved in Alzheimer's. Other changes that affect the brain may also play a role over time. The vascular system may fail to deliver sufficient blood and nutrients to the brain. The brain may lack the glucose needed to power its activity. Chronic inflammation sets in as microglial cells fail to clear away debris, and astrocytes react to distressed microglia. Eventually, neurons lose their ability to communicate. As neurons die, the brain shrinks, beginning in the hippocampus, a part of the brain important to learning and memory. People may begin to experience memory loss, impaired decision-making, and language problems. As more neurons die throughout the brain, A person with Alzheimer's gradually loses the ability to think, remember, make decisions, and function independently. Achieving a deeper understanding of the molecular and cellular mechanisms and how they may interact is vital to the development of effective therapies. Much progress has been made in identifying various underlying factors. Advances in brain imaging allow us to see the course of plaques and tangles in the living brain. Blood and fluid biomarkers are providing insights about when the disease starts and how it progresses. More is also known about the genetic underpinnings of the disease and how they can affect particular biological pathways. These advances enable the development and testing of promising new therapies, including drugs that reduce or clear the increase of tau and amyloid proteins in the brain, therapies targeting the vascular system, glucose metabolism, and inflammation, and lifestyle interventions like exercise or diet, and behavioral approaches like social engagement that may enhance brain health. Research is moving quickly, ever closer to the day when we can delay or even prevent the devastation of dementia.
So as the video talked about, it's a very complex disease. There's the plaques, there's the tangles, there's inflammation, there's that vascular system, and maybe the glucose is not getting out to the brain that it needs to have the energy and to be able to function. So there is, it's very complex, but we are learning more about it every day with all the research that's going on. You see here this picture that we've shown and used many times before, but just because you don't see the changes that are happening in the brain, what we see is our loved one changing in front of us, but we don't see why. You know, if there's an open wound like on my leg or in my arm, I can see the damage that's happening, and I can see it getting worse or recovering, whatever. I can see that, what's causing that pain or causing those changes that are happening. With Alzheimer's disease, you don't see that. But you can see here in the brain, there are real physical structural changes that are happening. Those neurons that are being attacked by the plaques and tangles and the inflammation, those neurons wither away when they're no longer able to work. They die, they wither away, so they shrink up, and that's essentially causing that shrinkage in the brain. The abilities are lost, but there are many abilities that remain. And everyone's experience is individual. So not, even though we know the pathology or framework of how this disease progresses, it's going to be individualistic for each person. And a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is a ruling out process. Ideally, you get a specialist to help with the diagnosis, or you get a team of people to help with that diagnosis, whether it's a neurologist, geriatricians, geriatric psychologists, nurses, social workers, you name it, can help, because you get a bigger picture of what's going on. But there's a battery of tests that they will do to help rule something out. They want to make sure it's not a medication interaction or it's not an infection of some sort before they can give you a probable or possible diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and then particularly or potentially what stage you're in. But they'll do a family and medical history. They can do some psychiatric history, a history of cognitive decline or behavioral changes within the family or within yourself or the person being diagnosed. A variety of different cognitive testing and memory tests as well. There might be problem-solving tests that come up. There's a whole variety they can do to kind of determine maybe where you're at in a disease state, or determine where there's the cognitive decline happening in which area of the brain. Some, of course, physical exams, neurological exams, and then blood tests and blood work. We want to, again, rule anything out, vitamin deficiency, malnourishment that can look like Alzheimer's disease. And then once they get all these tests back, what's not on here is they can do brain scans of some sort as well, whether it's CT scans or MRIs, because there's different pictures they can take of the brain and they can see different things. You know, whether it's the glucose levels in the brain, or if they can do, the MRI to see if there's strokes happening or something like that. Because they want to gather all this information to rule anything possibly out, but just to have a bigger picture of what's going on to the whole person before they can give you that diagnosis. And it may be they can determine or tell you, yeah, there's some dementia going on. They may not be able to tell you that's Alzheimer's disease or it's just Alzheimer's disease. They can take a picture and see that there's plaques and tangles building up in the brain with a PET scan and a CT scan. But there's also might be some other things going on as well. So it can be hard to identify the exact type of dementia or type of dementias, because there might be a couple in there. But it also might be harder to tell you exactly where they are in the disease state. But there's a lot of staging tools for that. In anybody that's diagnosed, we do say we want to talk about the medications, those FDA-approved medications that are out there. Because the earlier you get on these medications, the more benefit you have or the better chance you have for them to actually work. And I will say these medications, they are not disease modifying, meaning they cannot stop the disease. They can't slow the progression of it for a long period of time, or they can't cure it or prevent this disease. But what they do is they help manage the symptoms. So they can help somebody do better for a longer period of time. They can help manage some cognitive symptoms that are happening in the brain, but also anxiety and depression as well, that can, of course, influence the level of dementia that somebody may be presenting with. And also the effectiveness of these medications does vary by person. So it could be that you may not see a change in your loved one at all. Or that you might see, yeah, I really did notice a change and it helped for a really long period of time and it was great. Or you might say, you know what, the side effects are just too hard on my loved ones. So they may go back and say, let's try a different type of medication. If you were on Aricept, they might say, hey, let's try Exelon and see how the side effects are on that. The first three that are listed are for early stages, mild, moderate, and severe. And then as the disease progresses, they can add on Namenda or do that Namzarac, which is just a combination of one of those earlier stages disease along with the late stage to help with the symptoms. For treating Alzheimer's disease, and really any related dementia, non-pharmacological treatments are your best option. We're going to do the medication, of course, and you, of course, want to treat any other coexisting illnesses that they have as well, because that can make the dementia better or it can make it worse. So we want to make sure that everything's being treated. They go into the doctor regularly. You're getting their eyes checked out and their ears so they can hear and see everything. But really the main goal for treatment is to maximize dignity and independence. And really, how do I create a quality of life for my loved one or for my client or my resident, no matter what stage of the disease they're in? And as the disease changes, how do I create that quality of life? That's really kind of our base level for how we treat Alzheimer's disease. This includes interventions for any behavioral expressions that might come up that can be challenging, of course, and study after study after study show that our non-pharmacological treatments are much more effective in reducing behavioral expressions than a medication. Now, I will say there are times and places that medication may be needed, but we always want to try non-pharmacological treatments first. Not only for treatment of a behavioral expression, but also just the enhancement of quality of life and dignity. And here are some examples of what non-pharmacological treatments are. Exercise, and there's a lot of studies that show that persons in early stage Alzheimer's disease, if they keep up or they do exercise, whether it's aerobic and some strength training, has positive benefits on that cognition, and it can help them maintain where they're at that level for a longer period of time. Of course, cognitive stimulation, just because they have Alzheimer's disease doesn't mean they can't do anything, okay? There's still a lot remains. There's a lot of abilities that remain. So how do I keep them engaged cognitively? They can still learn new things. It might be a little bit harder. It's going to look different, but keeping them engaged in purposeful activities that are stimulating, that are challenging for them. Just because they have Alzheimer's disease doesn't mean they can't do anything challenging. We want to keep them engaged, and it also shows to improve depression. There's validation, and this is where you're validating their feelings, their emotions, how they're experiencing the world or their environment at that moment. Music, of course, is stimulating across the board. Memory exercise, cognitive exercises, familiar activities that are purposeful and give a sense of purpose and community, reminiscing, etc. There's pet therapy, aromatherapy, light therapy, music therapy, using intergenerational activities. So getting together with people that are younger and doing activities with them. And then just staying social. People, even in the late stages of Alzheimer's disease, still, it's a basic need for us to stay social, just as a human being, right? To have this social connection. Even in those late stages, there can still be socialization. And socialization fires a lot of the areas of our brain. So not only if we're socializing, are we getting that basic need met, but we're also getting some emotional needs met, some cognitive needs met, maybe even some spiritual needs as well. So very quickly, I'm going to walk through some 3 stages of Alzheimer's disease. And I told you we weren't going to have time to go through all these slides, but you have them for more information. But I'm going to point out a few common characteristics that change. And then I want us to talk about this theory of retrogenesis. But in the early stages, we really want to focus on normalization, keeping things as normal as possible, familiar, and then kind of preparing for the future. But early stage Alzheimer's, they can still function independently. Now, this is always going to need to be assessed, a constant assessment, but they may still be able to live alone for a period of time. They may still be able to work or do some forms of work, possibly drive. Again, this is an assessment and this is all individualistic, right? Maybe they can still do even manage medications, assess it, right? There's still a lot of independence that they can do. We just need to be there to maybe help organize or support them through that, and keep an eye on it. That observational support really are the best interventions. And really, this is the time to get our affairs in order, start medications. What are those, legal, financial paperworks we need to get in order? But you will see the short-term memory loss. That's a hallmark with Alzheimer's disease, not finding the right word or really just having a hard time remembering what's their name. They may substitute words and can have a hard time performing tasks that are demanding. Familiar tasks they can probably do. You might notice you're doing them slower, but those demanding tasks are in social settings for a short period of time. Long periods of social settings can be tiring. Short, they're good. I mean, even in like the doctor's office, they can do really good in the doctor's office for a short period of time. But if they were there all day, that's another story. So losing objects, misplacing them, and not being able to retrace their steps or logically think through, what could I have done with that wallet that I set down? Where was I doing earlier where could I have left it? Or did I put it somewhere? Not being able to logically think through those things. And then just harder time planning and organizing their day-to-day lives, much less kind of those bigger things like finances in their lives as well. Can be easily irritated because of the changes that are happening that they may or may not be aware of. But there might be this subconscious, and it can kind of come and go. There's sometimes they might be aware and sometimes they're not, or it's kind of like sometimes they can shine and they can do, and then at other times they can't. So that fluctuating between happens as well. Can easily get off task. And having a hard time interpreting the background noise. So this is how their 5 senses are changing. They're just having a harder time taking in all the stimulation. This can be background noise. It can be people in the room. It can be internal stimulation, whether it's hunger or thirst or the needing to go to the restroom. All the stimulation, their brain's having a harder time focusing on what it needs to focus on and what's important. And as the disease progresses even into the middle stages, all the stimulation can be overwhelming. And we've all been overstimulated before. And how do we respond to that overstimulation is different. Sometimes we retreat, sometimes we get more amped up and have higher anxiety. It just depends on the time and the person. A harder time processing complex instructions. Again, they can still do most things. It's when we ask to quiz them or ask them to do something that they can't do, or we're asking them to do it in a hurried state. They might be able to do it. It's just going to take them a little bit longer. And then limited decision making. They can still make their own decisions, and this is something we want to carry across the stages of the disease. even in the late stages, but they might just need to have a two choices to choose from as opposed to 5. Routine is important. And we say this in the early stages, if you can kind of set up a routine, this is going to help into the middle stages and the late stages. And a routine is, we don't have to be militant about the time, but we're getting up around the same time, we're eating our meals around the same time, the activities that we do are familiar and we do them around the same time. There's a safety and security when there's a familiarity to the day. They may not remember what's going to happen next in the day, but there's some familiarity and a safety to that. It can also help us as care partners help combat an empty day or help combat boredom that may happen. And then it can help us if in our caregiving lives, help us with a better balance, whether we're still working or just in our life balance as well. So as the disease progresses to the more moderate stages, we do need to add more support. And really with the moderates or the middle stages, this is where you're going to start to see more surprises happen. These can be those challenging behavioral expressions because they're more confused. They're not as able to use their words to communicate, but they'll always need to communicate their wants and wishes and desires. They're just with how they're communicating changing. And that's what you typically see in the middle stages. You might notice that they're still able to do most things, but they might be skipping steps in those tasks. So the tasks of brushing your teeth, for instance, there's a lot of steps in that, and they can still do most steps, but they're just going to need more assistance with that. So whether it's there that you're there to cue them along, you do it alongside them, you might physically, hand them the toothbrush. You might have even put the toothpaste on the toothbrush and hand it to them and show them how to do it. And that way they can do it. I'm maintaining what their level of ability is and what their independence and dignity is, instead of me just going in and doing everything for them. Because as soon as you start to do for somebody with dementia, they're going to lose it a lot faster. So we don't want to do that. And that's really one of the biggest things we see in the middle stages. Their memory, it's not just short-term memory now, that's starting to get into that longer-term memory. So it's kind of like they're regressing in time. They may not remember they're the 77-year-old woman that has Alzheimer's disease, but they might remember when they were, 40 and their kids were in middle school and they were, trying to go to soccer practice and then ballet practice. And here it is later in the day. Well, I've got things to do. We got to get the kids to practice. We can't be sitting around here. I got to go. I got to get out of here. I got to get those kids to practice and get dinner started, because that's what they're remembering, because they're regressing back into that time. And I know I'm skipping ahead a lot, but because of time, I want to get here. In the later stages, this is where somebody will need total care, 24-hour care, and they will need help with all of those activities of daily living. This is the dressing, eating, using the restroom, showering, hygiene, all of those things, those basic things that we do every day, whether it's we're assisting them through the whole activity, or we are really doing for them, doing with them that whole activity, even though we still want them engaged in that. They're less and less aware of their surroundings, more and more confused. If we do not positively approach them or make a connection before we start to help them with an activity, by any means. And this, in the later stages, you can have more catastrophic reactions to care because they're more confused and we may not be approaching correctly. Their language is minimal. They may not have words, or they might have 1 or 2 words that they use during the day. But what they will always be able to do is social chit chat. That, hey, how are you? It's good to see you. The weather sure is nice out here. Those things that we first learned when we were little, they still have some of those. In the late stages, they will sleep for longer periods of time. And when they're awake, they might be semi-alert. So being aware of that. They're non-ambulatory at this time. And this stage of the disease is when they, quote unquote, start to look sick, because physically, this is when the disease starts to take over. Incontinence is an issue in the later stages. Urinary, but also fecal incontinence. And again, this is just what's happening to the brain. The brain controls everything. So when the damage is happening, the brain might lose that incontinence there. And then this theory of retrogenesis, and this, I know y'all cannot read this, but I will actually send this to Marty in a larger form so you can have this to where you can read it. But what this is suggesting is we have those stages of the disease. There's the mild, moderate, and severe, which we just walked through. There's a staging tool, a 7-stage, there's a lot of staging tools, but the 7 stages, which is we see more commonly, doctors tend to use. But then you have listed there those clinical characteristics. Some of the common changes I just went over very briefly. But what I want to point out, and as you look at this and get this larger form of this, you have that approximate developmental age and what their abilities and skills are still left. So if somebody in the middle stages of the disease, maybe they're in the middle stages crossing over into severe or late stages, they're operating on the same level as maybe a 3-year-old, 3 to 4-year-old. And as I look at that, I want to ask myself, well, what can a 3 to 4-year-old still do? What are they able to do? 3 to 4-year-old can dress themselves. Are they picking out their clothes? Do sometimes they put them on in the wrong order or put them on backwards? Yeah, so they might need assistance there, but they're still able to dress themselves. They can feed themselves. They're not preparing meals. And they may have a hard time with the knife and the fork, but they can still use a spoon and sometimes a fork in their hand. So how can I prepare that food that meets their abilities? Now, I will say, as a quick thing, we don't ever want to treat them like a child or give them activities that are childish, because they will know that. So they're still grown people that have lived long lives, that have been important, people that need them. So don't give me a child's plate or some, a spoon that's got Paw Patrol on it, because that's not me. I want a real spoon. But I also, how do I set that activity up to meet their abilities? So, and it's nurturing what remains in individuals with Alzheimer's disease. That is our information. Told you that was a lot of information, that we would not get through all of it, but I appreciate y'all's patience with that, and you have the information to read back on. So
there are some questions in the chat, and there's a couple of questions in the chat, but I had read 3, now there's 4, I guess, in the
okay.
In the Q&A.
Is there an association with neurological disorders? Is there an association with neurological disorders, Parkinson's and epilepsy? There is Parkinson's and epilepsy, persons that have one of those illnesses, particularly on the motor movement, chronic illness thing, as that disease progresses, they're at a higher risk for developing dementia. So you would call that a secondary dementia, because it might be Parkinson's is their first, but as that disease progresses later into those years, there's some dementia component of that cognitive decline that you can see. Epilepsy, multiple sclerosis is the same. Did I miss a question? Can you send me the PowerPoint? Aha, okay. Where are more people diagnosed with dementia during and after the pandemic? I don't know the answer to that, if there were more people diagnosed with dementia during or after the pandemic. I do know that those that already had dementia, whether they were diagnosed or not, more than likely saw a decline in their disease state, whether they were at home or they were in a community or at home alone, because of just everything that changed and the confusion that happened for all of us, and then possibly just kind of the isolation that we all went through. Like you mentioned, you couldn't get out and do your normal activities or keep that routine you normally had. So whether they were diagnosed or not, you probably did see a decline in a lot of people. Should we be screening for dementia at a certain age? I would say yes. And I would say, I know that Medicare right now does have a cognitive screening that probably most of the times you have to ask for. It's free. But really, and this is kind of the gold standard, you want a baseline of where you're at cognitively. And they can do a cognitive screen. Medicare will pay for it. That way you see, and if you do it every year, you're better off to be able to see your doctor as well to see if there's any subtle changes. So they can do that screening. That way you have that baseline. And then if there are any changes, then you'll more than likely catch them beforehand. Can you keep your brain active in old age, such as doing puzzles? and prevent or at least delay the worsening of dementia? Yes. So there are several areas that we can do to reduce our risk, but absolutely possibly delay the onset of any Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. And this has to do with that cognitive exercise. You want to challenge yourself physically, but mentally keep it active. Stay social is one of them. Of course, watch what you eat. Your diet, plant-based diet, is one of the, it's the MIND diet and the Mediterranean diet that are have a lot of studies behind it that will reduce your risk. Managing your stress and your sleep. So, and is one treatment better than the other? Do we still use in a mixed dementia? I don't, the treatment for dementia, I would say, when you're diagnosed, try the medications, get with the doctor and really watch the medications, those FDA approved ones, manage any other chronic conditions you may be living with, but doing those non-pharmacological interventions across the disease state. And this really, it kind of comes down to, well, what's enhancing my quality of life and what's treating the whole person. So physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, behaviorally, all of those things I think are the best treatments for dementia currently. And it was David Hyde Pierce who was the narrator on that first 3-minute video that we saw. He is an advocate in this disease. Can loss of eyesight be caused by Alzheimer's disease? I don't know that it's particularly due to Alzheimer's disease. There might be some coexisting things that are going on, and Alzheimer's disease exacerbates some of that. I do know that hearing loss is also a risk factor for any type of dementia, because hearing loss can be isolating, and when we're more isolated, we're not as cognitively active, right? When should psych services such as inpatient psych be beneficial for somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's? Psych services are, it's going to be individualistic depending on the person and the situation. Any other kind of diagnosis they may have or develop or living with is when you might use psych services, but there can also just be times where the disease is creating a lot of hardship on the person. And you might need to go in and talk to, and the doctor might need to prescribe medications. There's a time and place for medications, because we don't want that person to be living in fear or high anxiety, or, it's about quality of life. So are there some medications that can help short term get over, maybe it's hallucinations or paranoia or something like that, help them get over this stage of the disease, and then they can come off. We don't want to stay on those medications, but again, it depends on the person.
Good.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. Let's go review the slides again, the slide for the CEUs again, if we could, since we're past our time. Let's do that, and then we'll talk about next month.
Yes, so you will get an email this afternoon or tomorrow with the slides, the link to the recording, and then the SurveyMonkey evaluation. If you would like your free CE credit for nursing, social work, licensed professional counselor, or a certificate of attendance, you must complete the evaluation. And then if you will allow us about 4 weeks from today to process all of those, and you'll receive your certificate by email.
Great. Just make sure, I want to note that make sure you understand the SurveyMonkey is required for your CEUs, but we also would like for you to fill out the SurveyMonkey and the Google survey. The Google survey helps the Area Agency on Aging with our objectives setting that we set forth and that's how we track it. But the SurveyMonkey does the same thing for the James L. West Center. So please, we ask you to fill both of them out if you would. And we look forward to you all being with us next month for Holidays and Dementia. What you should know. It's really important stuff, let me tell you. And so we also appreciate you all helping to spread the word about that. I know we didn't get to all the questions. I don't know if, Jamie, you want to continue to ask questions. I know you have stuff on your plate. If you'd like to do that, that would be fine. If you'd like to just ask people if they'd email them to me if they have another questions, we could do that as well. That's your call.
I can answer as many as I possibly can, if that's fine with you.
Sure.
So let me stop sharing. So how to handle excessive sleep. Oh, I just lost it. Excessive sleep or loss of appetite. Excessive sleep, it might be what stage of the disease they're in. In the later stages, they are going to sleep a lot more. It could be that there are talking to a doctor about some potential stimulants, whether it's for sleep or for appetite was the other question, a loss of appetite. It also might just be what else is going on. Is there something else? Are they also living with depression? Persons with dementia, no matter what stage of the disease they're in, can have a high rate of depression as well. Of course, depression can, we might sleep more or not eat as much when we're depressed. So what else is going on that might not be related to the Alzheimer's or related dementia? So it's talking to a doctor about that. And then, being, up to what are there possible medications that can help for a short period of time. But it also might just be what are those non-pharmacological interventions that we can do, keeping them up and engaged, doing exercise, but also some of it might just be acceptance that this is just how the disease is presenting in them right now. As cognitive function declines, how appropriate is a geriatric assessment in a behavioral health hospital prior to placement in memory care? Experienced unfortunate psychiatric request to county mental health judge to commit 30 days and give psychotic medications. Quick downward spiral after that. That might be an question that you email to me, because I don't know if I quite understand, but you shouldn't have to get a geriatric assessment to move into a memory care. There would just be a diagnosis from your, of course, a proper diagnosis, right? But there are times, but there are unfortunate things that happen with antipsychotic medications that can cause a downward spiral after that, or they decline and then they're not going to come back to the place they were at before then. So you might want to email me if I didn't quite answer that question or didn't.
I can chime in there a little bit. I realize I used to manage a facility in Dallas that we had all the levels of care, and there's a lot of times the geriatric assessment helps especially when you're dealing with families that are in denial and they don't understand where they're at. And a lot of times if you bring in the third-party professional, it helps them understand maybe what stage they're at. Some cases it's denial, some cases it's they don't want to spend the extra money it costs to get them into the dementia care. But a lot of times that geriatric assessment or the geriatrician can help with working with the family and helping them come to terms with where they are at the state they're in and what kind of care they need.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marty. Yes. And is there a correlation between OCD and Alzheimer's or dementia? And there can be. There are over 30 different common symptoms of Alzheimer's and related dementia, and there can be a correlation with OCD, or somebody that has dementia might have some OCD tendencies. And that's just, again, what's happening to the brain. So there certainly can be a correlation.
Somebody asked if they leave now, will they get CEUs? Yes, you're only required to stay for the hour. I'm sorry, I should have said that at the time.
Yes. And what sites offer assistance for both clients and caregivers? I think most places that offer services for persons with dementia are also going to help the caregivers as well, or they will at least send you to a place that does. And how can you help a senior who lives alone and you have suspicions that they have dementia? And that is a very tough one, because we know there's a lot of people at home alone that have dementia. We're trying to tackle that at a system level. If you think they might have dementia, is there a way to contact family? Can you get in touch with them? Are they even open to that? Are they even really open to talking to you? If there is really, it's just keeping that observational care and support on them, offering, can I bring you meals over? You might bring meals over, but are they eating? I'm not sure. Just trying to be as involved as you can, but really finding out who is that family or a responsible party for those individuals. If it becomes a safety concern or a risky behavior, you will need to you can call for a wellness check, but you can call the Adult Protective Services as well, because they can come in, they will have the authority to come in and do an assessment, and then they can fill in support systems from what they find from there. And are there areas of the US or the world where the risk of dementia is less? There are certain areas where dementia or Alzheimer's disease is not as prevalent, but it is a worldwide problem. And I, not off the top of my head would I know where that's at, but I do know here in Fort Worth, Texas, we're a Blue Zone committee, or Blue Zone certified community. And the Blue Zones has been known, they've been studies on this, these are the communities that live longer and live healthier, and it's due to lifestyle choices. So there's a book out there, there's a lot of studies, and different cities are deemed Blue Zones from what they've put in place.
Very good. I think we've covered most of everything. I think, Jamie, thank you so very much.
Yeah.
And thank you for your being so generous with your time. We're 15 minutes over. Thank you for staying on and answering the questions. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, I thank y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining us, and you all have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you.